On a soggy practice field in Carolina today, the Cleveland Browns went into their first game week of the 2025 season. Browns will open the regular season preseason, Friday night, 7 o'clock against Carolina Panthers. Well, everybody was there to see the progress of the Cleveland Browns and to see where the Carolina Panthers are at. There was really one guy that everybody wanted to see, and he's probably the most talked about fifth round quarterback selection in the history of the NFL. We're going to break it all down right now. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate each and every one of you that come to the OBR daily for your favorite Cleveland Browns content. While you're there, do yourself a favor, get yourself the VIP access. You get the Insiders Forum. You get the Ask the Insiders, where you can have your questions directly answered by us here at the OBR. Check it all out, of course, at theobr.com. We appreciate all of you. Show the support for the OBR streaming network beginning every night at 6 p.m. Multi shows nightly. Browns 3D kicks it off at 6, and tons of content for you to digest throughout your week. So practice began today. Wasn't the greatest weather. If you follow social media at all, you saw all your favorite Cleveland Browns beaters in their rain attire. Not necessarily the greatest way to have to do their job, but you plug on through anyway. And I think there's certainly some misconceptions just about exactly how these joint practices work. And I think that was definitely causing a tad bit of a stir today on social media as well. The joint practices are essentially meant for your top tier players, your first stringers. This time of year, this early in the preseason, not a lot of first string players are going to play. The Cleveland Browns have pretty much announced that you're not going to get any first stringers. So you subsidize that by having your players get their work in today on Wednesday. So they get the good work in today. There'll be some sort of walk in on Thursday. And then Friday night is essentially about the battles for the roster spots that remain on the roster. So while many just assumed that it was going to be a workload heavy day for Shedeur Sanders today at joint practices, and don't get me wrong, Shedeur got some work, did not get any run with the ones. Everybody still seemed to be very confused about what is going on. The Browns are not setting up a game plan to win the game on Friday night. If they do win the game on Friday night, that's certainly a plus, yes. But the plan is to get Shedeur Sanders out there and get Shedeur Sanders today, at least, as many repetitions with the guys he's actually going to be performing with Friday evening. And that's kind of been the plan for the Browns to this point. Now, will things change based on Shedeur Sanders showing Friday night? They most certainly can. But for Shedeur Sanders to go in today and get workloads with, Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman. Jerry Jeudy looked outstanding today. Granted, Carolina did not have their top cover corner, got in a brief car accident on the way to the practice today. He was obviously held up by the Carolina Panthers, 100% precautionary, but they did hold him out nonetheless. Jerry Jeudy was uncoverable. But Shedeur Sanders, if he were to take any reps and have some success with Jerry Jeudy and with Cedric Tillman, that's not necessarily going to do Shedeur Sanders much good in his preparations for the game Friday night. As I said, the first stringers are not going to play. So for him to compete against the first stringers today made sense. Certainly, this can all get altered. Everybody seems to want to debate and question and, use words like sabotage to how the Cleveland Browns have handled Shedeur Sanders to this point. I think it is just 100% irony, because I have a feeling the way this is all going to break down, by the time we get to week 1, Joe Flacco will be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. And I believe Shedeur Sanders is going to be the number 2. With Sanders, in my opinion, ending up being here the number two quarterback. Obviously, there's a lot of other variables, a lot of other moving parts here. Um, there was a video out with Adam Schefter who basically was mentioning that, the Browns rumored if it's four quarterbacks or it's not four quarterbacks. Now, if you remember, the initial 53 last year had the Cleveland Browns with four quarterbacks. That was changed in, before you actually got to, the week one game. So certainly, a lot of this would have to do certainly with Kenny Pickett. Now, it's been my belief, and I'm sure you guys heard me say it 100 times, that, I kind of felt the way this room was going to break down. The Browns were ultimately going to make their selection of Joe Flacco or Kenny Pickett, and that quarterback would be the starter. Is it 1 week, 1 month, an entire season? Certainly, that's a whole other bunch of variables to go into. I don't think, Kenny Pickett's injury and, well, that stinks for him, obviously, and it's, kind of robbed him of an opportunity to get, more reps out here, with perhaps a chance to, prove himself to be the starter. It was always, in my opinion, going to be Joe. So, but it kind of puts the Browns in this situation here now with Kenny Pickett. What do you do with him? Because, you can't release Dylan Gabriel. You won't get him back to the practice squad. You're certainly not going to release Shedeur Sanders. You're not going to get him back to the practice squad. Kenny Pickett, still could have some value within this league. I mean, you look at a team like the Los Angeles Rams right now have a serious quarterback, issue on their hands with, where Matthew Stafford is at with his back. We know Kenny Pickett obviously has, a link to New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore. So, there are places Kenny Pickett probably has some value right now. So if you are the Browns and Joe was going to start for you, and you're probably going to ride that horse until you have either physically been eliminated from any playoff contention, or you've seen that the writing on the wall was strong enough to believe, that you are just not a playoff contender. And if either one of those come to fruition, there would really be no reason at that point to play a Kenny Pickett. It would be obvious that you were going to, play Shedeur Sanders, play Dylan Gabriel, play them both, something of that scenario. Shedeur Sanders, it's just been, and I keep saying this, and I agree with a lot of you who have the questions you do. Maybe they don't always necessarily apply the way, some of the questions that I think you guys have do, like a day like today. There was no reason to have Shedeur Sanders take reps with, the ones today. Certainly, you want him to be as comfortable with the people he's, going to go into the game playing with. So developing a nice relationship with Jerry Jeudy, right now isn't a realistic option because you're not viewing Shedeur Sanders as your starting quarterback. Again, that is what it is, guys. Some thoughts from the practice itself today. The Browns, the running game is not doing much of nothing right now. And, this was with, the first team offensive line out there with Joe Flacco. There wasn't really much daylight. The Carolina Panthers seemed to have the upper hand as far as that went. And to be honest, it seemed like the Carolina Panthers maybe had the upper hand in kind of a little bit of everything today. And besides covering Jerry Jeudy. So now you go through this, and again, it was difficult, obviously, because every team handles their practices differently as to what can be videoed and what can't. Obviously, the Carolina Panthers sound like a team that they're a little bit more stringent as far as, what they allow to be done in practice, and, understanding that any video, any picture shot are obviously going to resurface their way to social media and rather quickly. Gabriel and Pickett did participate. It was just in 7-on-7s. And there were questions about that. Well, why can they do this and why can't they play on Friday night? A 7-on-7 drill, first off, if you're just the precipice of a 7-on-7, there is no offensive line. Therefore, there is no pass rushers. So, that's how you get to 7. You eliminate the right tackle, the right guard, and the left tackle. Therefore, you eliminate the 4 rushing defensive linemen. So it is not a overly strenuous drill for a quarterback, and most of the time, these drills are done with the quarterback in the shotgun position anyway. So essentially, there's not much dropping, so there's no reason that a player can't participate in a 7-and-7 on Wednesday and then still be deemed out for Friday. The 7-on-7 for a quarterback is honestly a really, really good way to start rehabbing your way back towards full-time work, which I'm assuming is the goal for Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel when the Browns get back to Berea, after this game Friday night. But it's a perfect rehab drill, and it allows you to keep your arm strength up. For the most part, those guys, they were all kind of accurate today. A lot of underneath stuff from, the folks I've spoken to. Again, there was one big one from Flacco to Jerry Jeudy, which probably would have been a long touchdown. Again, Jerry Jeudy's just becoming a really, really established piece here. He is probably the Cleveland Browns' best offensive player. Quick turn for Jerry Jeudy from about a year and a half ago, where his difficulties in Denver, and things just not seem to be going right. And then the trade to Cleveland, the subsequent contract extension, the monster 2024. And now here's Jerry Jeudy just, exuding a whole bunch of confidence that, maybe at some point he had lost a little bit. But once that light goes on for an NFL player, you get that taste of success that you feel you were always capable of. All of a sudden, it's kind of off and running. So certainly, been the case here now for, Jerry Jeudy in that respect. Again, now the defense, had some moments. If you saw, there certainly was a Dawand Jones just dropping, an opposing edge rusher. I'm sure it was a lovely, lovely day for Dawand Jones to be facing anybody other, of course, than Myles Garrett. If you call it, Joe Thomas had a post of, him having a couple of words interviewing Dawand Jones. And of course, Joe made the joke, that he had never felt smaller around a human being other than Shaq. But I think the picture itself just shows you where Dawand Jones is at now. And, we talked about, Dawand, establishing a new kind of commitment, to his diet, to his body. And it almost seems like Dawand is really just, taking this thing on full force. I mean, he looks fantastic. Um, and these things are not easy for a gentleman, 6'9", and at any given point, a couple of days worth of food away from 400. But I would probably honestly say, looking at where Dawand Jones is right now, I would probably say Dawand Jones is probably closer to 350 than he is 400, which is just an absolute monster number to be at for this guy. I mean, he looks svelte, he looks slim for a guy who is 6'9". And certainly with this opportunity in front of Dawand Jones, you know, basically, being given the left tackle job and have to prove that he is not capable of it. And, it's never been about the play for Dawand Jones. It's certainly been about the injuries. And then, of course, there are the questions with Dawand Jones were, you know, the injuries, which were mostly leg related, were they obviously attached to the fact that he was carrying so much weight to his body? But, you look for guys as they mature within the NFL to, find a way to embrace and, just give everything they have to the opportunities that are there for them. And, for what Dawand has done as far as, his diet, his, caloric intake, and all of these things, understanding that, he has this monster opportunity here. And, in year 3 of 4 on a rookie contract at a position the Browns would so, so much like to kind of put to bed for a while. Dawand Jones has really seemed to, embrace the opportunity and, he's doing everything he can to make sure that the Cleveland Browns feel that he is the guy, not just for today, but, for tomorrow and for seasons to come. So, it's really, been a interesting path for Dawand. Obviously got to start so early as a rookie doing an injury to Jack Conklin and played extremely well. And his rookie year comes short due to injury, struggled with weight issues in the offseason from 23 to 24 and kind of slowed down his rehab a little bit. And then, there was time where the Browns just had him in training camp of 2024, just working on getting the weight down, not necessarily working on the things that were going to help him improve his game. So, Dawand's year 2 season kind of got a little lost in the mix. Yes, it was, injury or rehab, but also part of it was, Dawand and kind of letting, the weight get to a number that was just unacceptable. But with where he's at now and looking the way he is, and we know the capabilities of Dawand Jones as a blocker. We've seen him at his best. We've seen him stifle a guy like TJ Watt. The thing that I'm kind of looking forward to, and if anybody's listened to me talk about Dawand in the past, is, the issues Dawand has had in being, an above average run blocker. It's not that easy at his size to get to the places he needs to get to. But playing left tackle within the wide zone system certainly really looks like the best opportunity for Dawand. A lot of his blocks are down blocks. So if you're imagining, obviously, there's going to be a man. Obviously, if Dawand Jones is lined up here, there's going to be a man on his inside eye. Most of the time, Dawand Jones' job is to just basically put that guy out of the screen. And that's a block that he shouldn't have any issues with. That's a block that he totally should be more than capable of handling. The issue though is when he's kind of got to go further out and he's kind of got to get in that linebacker zone. And as the linebackers are strafing towards where the ball is, getting in front of them, cutting them off, and and getting the reach blocks out, getting his arms out. So this, in my opinion, and where Dawand is at now physically, really opens my eyes to the fact that maybe Dawand can improve within the run game. I think it was gonna be one of those things where, hey, if he's 365, hey, if he's 370, and can still pass block, that's totally acceptable. But, if we're talking where he's now, getting that number of his weight lower and lower, it kind of broadens up and kind of raises what could possibly be some expectations of what Dawand can do with this left tackle position. And again, it's always going to be tough with a guy who is this big. Holding that weight, keeping that weight at a good number is certainly something that he's going to deal with for a long, long time, well after football. But the fact that he's basically, embraced this commitment to, changing his life, to hopefully change his career, to change his fortunes on the field, it really shows signs of, growth and certainly signs of maturity. And, we've talked a million times about where this Cleveland Browns offensive line currently is. And the fact that, outside of Dawand Jones, the four other starters on this offensive line do not have a contract for the 2026 season. So either way, there's going to be some moving parts, certainly for the Cleveland Browns on this offensive line. Once, 25 ends, we start getting to 2026. But if you can get left tackle kind of nailed down here by Dawand Jones and, nailed down for the foreseeable future, having it being the most important offensive line position there is, that changes a lot of things, certainly, for Cleveland, and, not having to maybe spend a high selection in next April's draft on a left tackle, because there is most certainly going to be other needs, certainly for this quarterback, for this Cleveland Browns team, heading into 2026. Um, I think this game is probably going to hit like DEFCON 5 levels by Friday night. It is going to be a nationally televised game between the Browns and the Panthers, obviously. Shedeur, Tom Brady was probably will be the most talked about third day selection in the NFL ever. But that's not the way it started for Tom Brady. That's the way it went with Tom just getting on the field, getting an opportunity, and obviously showing the world just exactly who the heck he was. Shedeur Sanders being drafted in the 5th round, all of this talk is basically all centered around, and with the fact that he's not even taken a preseason snap to this point. He hasn't even taken a snap with the ones in a practice yet. So this what's gone on in this, basically media storm around Shedeur Sanders, which has nothing to do with him whatsoever. Let's make sure we're all the understanding of that. This is, Shedeur Sanders did not make this media wave around him. Certainly, I would say there's, his father's lightning rod personality to it that, probably has, the naysayers of Shedeur Sanders here hoping, that there maybe just doesn't go well. This kid has put his entire life into, playing football, honing his craft, and, trying to be a good enough football player that he can maybe follow in his father's footsteps in the NFL. It was a terrible draft process. And I don't mean from Sanders. I think by the way it was handled, a lot of people just, wanted to basically bury this poor young man on the side of the road before he even got his opportunity. And don't know that that's, necessarily, it was just poor all around. And, even though Mel Kiper Jr. took it way too far during the draft because a lot of kids that deserve their time to be spoken about didn't get it, it doesn't necessarily mean that Mel Kiper Jr. was wrong in any way whatsoever. What we've seen from this point from Shedeur Sanders is, a guy who's obviously a hard worker. He is community oriented. He enjoys giving of himself, to the community. He's, gone and worked out places and understood that just a couple of text messages would turn what would be a couple of people in a crowd to a large crowd. He's embraced it. He's certainly shown love to the younger kids in the community. There's not a negative word that comes out of the building in regards to Shedeur Sanders and his work ethic. He is usually the first person on the practice field every single day. He is usually the last person off the field every single day. And these are things that usually are used as traits of a kid who was a son of a coach. But somehow, somewhere in all of this, that got used as basically a negative on Shedeur. And that for me was probably the most baffling part of it. I can understand, Deion Sanders is probably somebody that's either a love-hate type of guy. You either like who he is and how he represents himself, or you just don't. I don't think there's like a in between in regard to Deion Sanders. Me, I was a diehard Florida State fan growing up, watched Deion Sanders perform for the Florida State Seminoles, and was just absolutely enamored by the type of athlete this guy was. So, obviously watching all his NFL career and following his NFL career and his Major League Baseball career just became a high interest of me. Um, what people think of Dion now baffles me. I would say even more. He is, worked his way through in coaching football. Certainly, was down at Jackson State and, did a well enough job there where he got a, big time Big 12 program to be interested enough to basically give him the keys to their program. He's had a pretty solid first 2 years turning that program around. He is hard on his kids in regards of academics. He is hard on his kids in regards to their appearance, how they treat people. All of these things just really made for the whole scenario of why, Shedeur Sanders became public enemy number one during the 2025 NFL draft process. Just absolutely mind blowing. It just never made any sense. But for those, you know, who aren't with him, and for those that are with him, he's going to get the opportunity to start putting his mark on his path Friday night. And I know there's been questions, he hasn't gotten opportunities to practice with the ones. And again, I kind of answered that. He's not going to play with the ones. But this is Shedeur Sanders. His dad is Deion Sanders. Prime time. There is no stage that's too big. There are no lights that are too bright. Shedeur Sanders is ready to go. And it's been 8 months since Shedeur Sanders has got to actually play quarterback in a football game. So all of this that went on during the draft process and the stupid, tech prank phone call, all of this stuff that Shedeur basically had to bite his tongue and handle everything and just try to be as classy about it as all as possible. When you go through stuff like that and you go through tough times, what do you usually get you through tough times? What your favorite thing to do is, or what you're good at that makes you feel good about yourself. And those are things Shedeur hasn't been able to do since December. He's going to get to go out Friday night in Carolina against the Panthers and, spin that ball all over the place. And, whether it's, Deontay Johnson or Jamari Thrash or Luke Floria or Lavardane or the tight ends that he's built a relationship with, I think the expectation Friday night for Shedeur Sanders is that he's going to play, and he's going to play pretty damn well. You know, he's put in the work. He's put in his playbook study. He's put in his video study. We all know how much physical work he puts into playing the position. So I think Shedeur is going to hit the ground running. And I think Shedeur not getting the opportunity in practice, but others maybe not showing so well when they were given that opportunity. And I think when Shedeur steps under center or behind center Friday night in Carolina, we're going to see Shedeur just go back to doing what he did at Colorado, and that was basically just throw the pill all over the place. I don't have any questions about whether or not the kid can actually play the position. I had my concerns, certainly, about how he dealt with pass rush. There certainly were questions around that Colorado offensive line. These are all true. Some those sacks and bad sacks that were taken, certainly were poor offensive line play. And then Shedeur tried to maybe hero ball it into something that it was never going to be. I don't think he's going to have the opportunity to hero ball it in the NFL. These guys are just too fast, too dominant, too quick. And, Shedeur, to be fair, athleticism is just not something that's necessarily off the charts. So, I think he's going to be intelligent enough to know that, his best weapon is to just get rid of the ball as quickly as possible. Find the open guy. Usually throw it to where the pressure came from is usually the key to success. So I'm, really, really intrigued to see how this is all going to play out with Shedeur come Friday night. Again, I actually have some pretty high anticipation that I think he's going to show fairly well. And then as the Browns kind of get back to work for next week, I think that's when you're going to see that there's probably going to be a change in how it's handled with Shedeur. And I think you're going to see that Shedeur, is maybe going to start, creeping into taking reps from Kenny Pickett, creeping into taking reps from Dylan Gabriel. Because with this game experience he's about to get on Friday night, this literally has a chance to, basically make the Browns have to flip the script on this. Snoop Huntley there and practice today in Carolina. Certainly got some reps in. He was the vital guy for Cleveland to sign here just because they needed a guy who could come in and be ready to play on Friday night. So basically only about 3 days turnaround. Huntley can do that, of course, as he was here with the team last summer. I don't think he's going to play a ton. I think they want Shedeur to go out and get a good amount of work. And I think the more success Shedeur possibly has, the shorter the outing could possibly be. So, say Shadeur's cooking, has a really great first half. You give him one more drive, maybe in the third, and everything looks positive. You got to get him out on that high note and just let him go enjoy the moment and have all the good tape to digest over the weekend, and then just kind of give him a bigger role when next week begins. Week 2 certainly of the preseason. Browns were in Carolina today, joined practices. Mostly starters participated. Not necessarily the best day for the Browns. Running game had issues. We are trending towards preseason game number 1 Friday night against Carolina Panthers. And We've all wanted it. We've all hoped for it, and we're going to get it on Friday night. Shedeur Sanders will be QB1 for the Cleveland Browns in Carolina against the Panthers. Appreciate everybody for coming out in support of the OBR streaming network every night beginning at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D. Plenty of other shows throughout the week. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR streaming network on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. As always, please keep coming back out to the OBR.com for your favorite written content covering the Cleveland Browns from our fantastic group of writers. Check out the VIP access where you get the insider forums. You also get the Ask the Insider options as well. Please check all of that out. All of that being said, this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D and the OBR streaming network, and we will talk to y'all tomorrow.